Hi and big welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about my big, huge European vacation. This is not a vacation I took just by myself, but I went with my wife and my 4 children. So a total of 6 people traveling to Europe. And you would think that I did a great deal of planning and preparation and laid everything out as far as what we're going to do day 1, 2, 3, and 4, but that's not the case at all. In fact, I kind of flew by the seat of my pants, which means that this makes for an interesting video and maybe a little bit more expensive trip than I would have liked, but at the same time, it's an adventure. And good news, at least for you and people who are watching, is that I filmed the entire trip. So from the time we got onto the airplane and everything we did in between, it's all captured on film. And I'm going to share it with you today because I want to tell you the lessons that I learned, things that I did right, a lot of things that I did wrong, and maybe from my mistakes you can learn how to travel better. Part of the reason why I didn't plan, to be honest with you, I was a bit nervous. Nervous about messing up, nervous about not getting it right. And also when you're traveling with 6 people, it's hard to do what everyone wants to do. Some people want to do A, B, C, and D, others don't want to do that at all, and then try to make everyone happy was a big challenge. So this is really a lesson in how not to travel to Europe. It was a very expensive trip, a trip of a lifetime. I don't want to get the impression that this is something that I do every year. I've been to Europe before, many years ago when I was a young man, but now I'm going as an adult. And well, I was an adult when I went years ago, but now I'm going as a father, as a husband, and with a lot of people who are dependent on me to get it right. So I hope you stay with me for the entire journey as I travel, not just to London, but we go to Paris and then to Italy. And it was a really grand European trip where we hit a lot of different things. It was the trip of a lifetime. I think you'll be entertained. I think you'll like it. And I hope you stay with me as I explore Europe together as we head off to London. When it comes to places that you can stay, there's going to be a variety of different options. And for us, it was sort of a budget trip. We did a lot of expenditures, but we spent most of our money on entertainment value things. And we kind of maybe didn't spend as much on some other areas. One of the areas that we cut back spending on, it wasn't really cheap, but it was modest, is our accommodations. As far as where we spent the night, where we slept, all that kind of stuff. Now, one thing I would recommend, this is a big tip to you. We didn't necessarily get it right in London, but we certainly got it right when we went to other places. And choose a location that is close to the city center. What I mean by that is, don't be so far out into the boondocks that you have to spend an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes travel into the city in order to get where you want to go. Now, we weren't too far out, but we weren't close either. And what that meant was we did a fair amount of traveling to get into the heart of London, where all the entertainment option is. And what you've been looking at right now is our Airbnb. You can see it's very spacious. A lot more spacious than you would get in a hotel room. And also we had the benefit of having a refrigerator. We could cook our own food. So that was a huge savings cost to us. So the downside is, with being a little bit further out, we had to spend a lot of time traveling to the interior part of England. So my big takeaway for you when it comes to the Airbnb is, don't necessarily get something too far out. Try to spend the money and get something a little bit closer in. That way you don't have to navigate railroad, buses, and we'll get to transportation option because that's another big mess all by itself. But you don't have to navigate all that, especially if you can just wake up and walk out and everything is there. However, you're going to pay for it. When it comes to renting an Airbnb, here are my big tips to you. And these are things that you really need to focus on because it applies not just to this Airbnb, but to all the Airbnbs that we rented throughout our entire trip. First off, do not focus strictly on the price. The price is only one of many elements that you need to win on in order to have a great stay. This is going to be your landing zone, the place where you come, you refresh, you recharge. So you need to get this part of it right. Also, here's the big thing. If you don't see it, it's not there. Don't assume that it's there. When we rented our Airbnb, we assumed that since it had a bedroom, naturally it would have closet space. Well, we rented a bedroom, and the largest bedroom where most of us end up staying, there was no closet whatsoever, which means that we were living out of our suitcases. Also, read all the reviews, especially the negative ones. The host is going to list all the good things about the Airbnb, which are going to be mostly true. However, they're going to maybe skirt over some of the negative points. When you read the reviews, the people who stay there will tell you all the things that maybe the host didn't intentionally try to leave out, but maybe they're not looking at it from the perspective of a traveler. So the reviews will help fill in all those empty gaps. The next thing is make sure it's close to some type of metro or transportation hub. The last thing you want to do is start your day off trekking maybe 20 minutes or paying for an Uber to get you just to the metro. So looking to find out how close it is. If it's a 5-minute walk, that usually is not a problem for most, but if you get into the 10-15 minute, now you're looking into a lot of exertion, especially if you have inclement weather on the day that you decide to go out. Also, one of the things that we did was we looked at all the pictures, and one of the things that we liked, well, two things that we really liked about this Airbnb is that it had a full kitchen and it had lots of natural light. You saw all the skylights, and we loved that portion of it. Also, it had a backyard and it had a neighborhood feel, which is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to feel like we were British people living in England, and we're getting up and we're going to see the town. So that definitely checked the boxes for us, and that's why this Airbnb overall be a little bit far out, but it was a winner for us. As I had mentioned earlier, when it comes to prices of hotels versus Airbnb is going to be the cheaper options. When you're looking at a hotel, depending on what star you get, you can rent a hotel anywhere from $97 to $260. Because our family was so big, even if we rented a cheap hotel, we would need at least 2 rooms. So we did a lot better staying in an Airbnb. Now the Airbnb you're looking at costs under $200 per night. So we were looking at $257 per night. The downside is that it's not directly in London, so we had to travel a little bit to get to the heart of London. Now you can find Airbnbs on average for around $232. So that gives you an idea right there as far as the options when it comes to living arrangements. In making the decision for us as far as where to stay, another major factor that we considered was that we had a full kitchen. So we made breakfast and we made some sandwiches and we ate out one big meal every day. So we were saving money by being able to cook on our own and having a full-size refrigerator. It also had a laundry machine. A lot of typical British residents and definitely in hotels do not have included laundry service. So we felt that we were saving by doing the Airbnb. Again, you're going to trade off for the inconvenience and the transportation costs, but for the most part, we felt that it was a really good option. Also, for my wife at least, she liked that she was staying in a London neighborhood. So the place that we were staying, it wasn't necessarily a touristy area. It was on the outskirts of London. However, it was a neighborhood where people went to work every day. So my kids got a chance to see London, in a traditional sense. Now, also, we went during the summertime. So this is the high season. The prices that we paid is probably the highest you'll pay. More than likely, you can find things if you go during the all season for a bit less. We're going to take a scenic ride under Tower Bridge, so you can take a look at what the bridge looks like, and let me talk to you about one of the biggest considerations when doing a European vacation, and it's the cost. There's no way around it. You have to wrap your mind around it that it's going to be expensive, and if you cut corners, you're going to go back home and regret it, because you're going to be penny wise and pound foolish. You're going to give up experiences and events and things that you can see and do in order to save a few dollars when you spent so much in order to go there. So the first thing you have to do is just accept that it's going to be ridiculously expensive. Once you come to terms with how much this trip is going to end up costing you, the next thing to do is bite the bullet and pay the piper. What that means is that you're going to have to start making reservations, buy the trip, the airline tickets, pay for the hotel. Those are your 2 biggest costs. Next cost is going to be transportation, as well as things to do and see. And then you have to put in money for buying gifts for people who are back home, also buying souvenirs for yourself, and all of this is going to add up very quickly. put it all on pen and paper before you go. That way you can have a realistic idea of what to expect. Once you come up with your final budget, go ahead and just add 10%, because things are going to come up. And then once you add that 10%, add another 10%, because sometimes emergencies do happen, especially when you're traveling with kids. Once you do all those things, then you finally come up with your final budget. Our budget for this trip was around $20,000, and it cost, well, $20,000 over the course of 3 weeks. I sort of jumped right in and got to where we were staying without telling you a little bit about our trip there. We left out of an airport in New Jersey, even though we didn't live in New Jersey. New Jersey is about 2 hours from us. That's because it was the cheapest flight available. However, because we saved some money there, and based on the time of the flight, we were able to get into London right around 10 o'clock in the morning. So our plan was to go to our Airbnb, drop our things off, and kind of have a full day so that we could do a lot of different things. Now, one of the things we didn't count on was jet lag. Now, I don't particularly get jet lag, but I was traveling with 6 people, so not everybody was altogether motivated to get up and get going on day one. So one of the cautions, I already made one caution, which was to stay close to the city center. The next pro tip is to be mindful of jet lag. If it doesn't affect you, just realize that you're traveling with other people and it's gonna more than likely impact them. One of the most expensive part of our trip was was the flight. The flight from New Jersey to London was 7.5 hours. One of the good things is that we had a chance to sleep. So when we got there, it was in the morning, so we were fully rested, and they did feed us on the flight twice, so it was kind of maybe a little bit of a disruption to wake up to eat and then fall back asleep, but it really worked out well that when we got there we were fully rested, and picking the time of the flight and the time that we arrived was intentional, and I think it worked out pretty well. When we got to our Airbnb, we took an Uber. And we relied on Uber quite a bit while we were traveling. And we also explored other transportation options. And London has a wonderful subway. They call it the Underground. And it was nice because the kids don't take the subway very often, and neither do I for that matter. But I'm far more familiar with the subway than they were. So it was a treat in and of itself having them take the subway and us figuring it out together. So using the subway was a treat. But we really relied on Uber in order for us to get around from point A to point B. We didn't really try to use the bus that often because we felt that it was difficult to manage. However, I gotta say, my kids, when they are at home, they use Google Maps. And Google Maps has a feature that you can pretty much work out transportation. And I was very skeptical about using it to take the bus. The last thing I wanted to do was to spend my vacation confused or trying to figure out where I needed to go or just being lost in general. I just felt it was a waste of time, and it wasn't so much the money, but if I'm spending all this time to go to England, the last thing I want to be is confused and lost. However, using Google Maps to work out our bus transportation was not only cheap, but it was convenient. It was amazing that they were able to just put in your current location, where you wanted to go. It would tell you where to walk to get to the nearest bus stop, what train to take. It gives you the option, first off, of whether or not to take a bus or a train or an Uber, and you can figure out your options so easily. So if you have a cell phone, which is what I'm kind of leaning into right now, don't take communication at home for granted. If you have an option to get cell phone coverage in whatever country you're staying in, absolutely make sure you do that. My kids all had cell phone coverage. I did not. And it just worked out wonderfully where I was able to rely on them in order to help me navigate all the different options in order to get around. Here's something that's unique to the United States, and it's cars. Most people in the United States have their own individual cars, or grew up with cars being just a way of life. However, people in Europe, as I come to find out, don't have as many cars as we do. As you look around, you can see there are plenty of them driving around on the roadway, but there are lots of ulterior modes of transportation that are available to you. And because of that, their transportation system is a lot more robust than anywhere in the United States. So when it comes to cars, scooters, bicycles, just renting different types of transportation modes, you'll find a wide assortment of ways to get around. Now, I recommend using Uber, the bus, or the underground, which is the subway system. But there's also an assortment of options, especially if you're in the tourist type areas. One of the things that we did was we rented bicycles, and some members of my family who were more athletic had bikes that you pedaled. Others who didn't want to use the bikes because they didn't want to go through the hassle of biking all day, they rented an electronic bike. And in doing so, they had a great time. And so I wouldn't rule that out as an option, renting a bike or scooter or something like that. Now, if you rent one of these bikes that go from point A to point B, that does take a little bit of figuring out. You know, there are these bikes that you can rent and you can sort of drop it off at a location and then walk around and then just rent another bike and go. That does take a bit like of a membership, and it is a bit confusing. What we did was we rented a bike for an entire day, which can get expensive because an electric bike can cost you as much as $60 a person, and you rent it for the entire day. It gives you, though, in my opinion, a great feel of the land. What I mean by that is you get to find or experience London in a earthy way, a way that you never forget. If you're on your bike for 60 miles and you're just, electric bike that is, and you're riding around all the tourist destination, it's just a more earthy experience is the best way I can describe it. But that's one of the options that we did, and my kids loved it. So did I. The entire family loved it. My daughter and my wife, after half the day, they were done and they went shopping. But my boys enjoyed it to no end. What lots of folks don't realize is how much transportation costs. Average American household, you're looking at 17% of the budget that's spent on transportation costs, which is the second most costly thing outside of housing, which usually takes up around 28%. The reason why I'm bringing up these numbers is because when you go traveling on vacation, people often overlook the cost of transportation. They think about accommodation and they think about entertainment costs, but transportation tends to be quite expensive. Uber versus a black cab in London, you're looking at a difference in maybe 75 to 50% less in taking the Uber. Now, we did take a black cab just for the experience of taking it, but you're better off getting the Uber app and figuring out how to use Uber in the United States. So when you get to England, it's not a big deal. Also, I would make sure that your credit card is all hooked up and everything is ready to go so that when you get there, it's not a problem. Now, when it comes to the cost of Uber abroad, it's roughly the same about the cost of the United States. I live on the East Coast in the DC metropolitan area, so that gives you an idea of what Uber costs. And when we went to England, it was relatively the same, just in pounds. And the dollar for dollar exchange was right around even, maybe a little bit less pounds for dollars, but it wasn't that big of a difference.
Yeah.
Here's another aspect of your travel abroad that you should not take for granted, and it's communications. Oftentimes you're looking around $35 to $50 for your cell phone bill at home, and when you go abroad, sometimes some carriers allow it to work and they allow you to pay a little bit extra. There are ways that you can get some type of a SIM card, not necessarily a card, but electronic SIM card, and have it work. I tried that and it did not work on my phone. That's why my phone was inoperable when I was abroad. However, my kids had a plan, because they have a different plan than I did, that allowed their phones to work while they were abroad. So their ability to text, use the internet, that was invaluable. If you're going abroad, and I would strongly recommend you do not go in the dark. What I mean by that is, don't think you're going to be able to get around without the internet in the palm of your hand or in your back pocket somewhere. It saves a great deal when it comes to just doing simple things. So definitely work out with your phone provider before you travel to figure out how you can get internet abroad. It can be expensive. It could cost you as much as $35 to $50 for a few days in a few time zones. But it's absolutely worth it, especially if you're going with two people. Don't think that if you plan to get separated from your group, like my family broke apart all the time. The boys went together and we did stuff that was really exhausting. And then my wife and my daughters, they went and they were together. If you're going to be separated in two different groups, definitely you need to have a phone in each group. So that way you can call, you can coordinate, you can say you're going to be running a little bit late, and everything doesn't have to be altogether precise. And so it's something that we take for granted when we're home because everyone has their own cell phone. We can always communicate. But when you go abroad and half the group doesn't have a phone communication and the other side does, it can be very challenging. So internet communication, telephone, those are things you want to work out before you get abroad. And the safest, cleanest way to do it is simply by having the extra charge paid to your carrier so that you don't have to worry about SIM cards, and if things don't work out, then you're calling from overseas trying to sort things out. It gets really messy. Let's now talk about the destinations. For me, you get on a flight, you go somewhere, you rent a hotel, you're doing all that work, taking time off work, you're doing all of this effort in order to get somewhere to see something new that you haven't seen before, something iconic. And we went to quite a few major destinations. And one of the things I did, which I strongly recommend you do, is go into your phone. I used Google Maps and I plotted out each destination. And it was great because when I got somewhere that I had cell phone signal, I could pull up Google Maps and I could find out how far I was away from other destinations. And I listed them down on a sheet of paper, and as I went to one destination, I was able to easily find out how far I was away from another destination. So I always had an idea of what I wanted to see, how much it costs. What I didn't have is a straightforward plan as to, we're going to see this on day one, we're going to see this on day two. We sort of went with our feelings, which is generally not how I like to travel. However, for my family, that's what works. Having a set plan where we're going to do this on day one, this on day two, this on day three, that usually doesn't work when I travel with my family. So I have to leave it open. And having it an open plan really helped because we could flex. We could one day do something that was really time consuming and physically draining, and the next day do something that's far more relaxed. And by having conversations at the end of the night and in the morning before we got our day started and sorting things out worked for our family. Now, there were things that I had on my list that I didn't get a chance to see or experience. However, for the most part, when you're traveling with a group, you definitely have to have a great deal of flexibility. And having an idea of what you wanted to do and being able to adjust on the fly worked for my family, and I think it will work for you too as well. So that's, in my opinion, one of the things that really went well on this trip. There are a couple of things that you must do. You got to see Buckingham Palace and Big Ben. But a few standout things that I really didn't expect that were really exceptional was the tour of London. I went in there thinking it was going to be like maybe a few hours. It could have really been the entire day. Towards the end, we just had to run through it because we realized that we had other things booked and things were taking too long, but everybody really seemed to enjoy the Tower of London. So if you're going there, I would give it an entire day. Now, the other thing that stood out to me was going to Chinatown. Didn't expect this at all, but we live close to the city, but we don't live in the city, so being in a city maybe stood out to us more. But we just loved the vibe, the energy that was in Chinatown, which is right next to Trafalgar Square. So having that whole entire, being there and just walking around, and just window gazing and just seeing the British people walk by and enjoying that time, those were standout experiences for us. So that's my big recommendation when it comes to where you should go. Now, you should definitely eat in Chinatown, in my opinion. Unfortunately, when we got there, we did not have an appetite. We had just ate, but it was nice to walk around. And if I had to go back and, that's one of the things I would do differently, is I would definitely make plans to eat in Chinatown. This was a standout experience, and I talked about it, alluded to it earlier on, and that was the all-day bike ride. My sons and I rented a bicycle, and we rode throughout the entire London proper. And it was one of the nicest rides that we had, and one of the best times that we had together. So we rode together, then we parked and we ate, and it just was a wonderful experience. Strongly recommend it. I think you see London, and maybe it's because too that I love biking, that maybe that's why it stood out to me so much, but it was one of the best experiences that I had, and in talking with my kids, they enjoyed it tremendously too as well. Okay. All right, now let's get into a different subject. Let's talk about food. For us, food was going to be a big deal. We wanted not only to just travel to destinations, but we wanted to eat the local foods. And the big thing was fish and chips. And I love fish and chips. So normally when I go to American restaurants, on occasion I'd order fish and chips if it's on the menu. And I generally tend to like seafood. So when we went to England, it was a definite that we would order fish and chips. I don't know what I expected. I don't know if I expected it would taste much better, but it just tastes like fish and chips that I would ordinarily get anywhere else. So maybe it's the places that I went that, but I had it 3 different places. So at any rate, I digress. But food is going to be a big part of vacation spending. On average, the average American spends about 10.4% of their budget on food. However, when you're on vacation, food outside the house costs 5 times as much as, say, if you prepared it in your home. So most of the food that we ate was food that we ate on the run while we were in restaurants and things like that. So our vacation spending on food was upwards around 25 to 30% of our total budget. However, there's a lot of things that we did to cut food costs. Number one is we ate breakfast at home, and for the most part we had sandwiches that we kind of ate for lunch and brought snacks with us. So eating out was just basically lunch and dinner. Food costs was just about the same as you would expect at home. It wasn't much more expensive than we would have thought, and so whatever price that you would ordinarily pay for food, it wasn't an elevated cost. Meals were costing us just about the same. Now, when we went to other places, then it was less, a lot less, surprisingly less. We'll talk about that when we go to Italy and different parts of Europe. But for London, it was relatively the same. Now, the first restaurant we went to, the food cost there was just astronomically expensive. And it was a thing that we did, but we didn't do that very often, where we would go out to really expensive restaurants. But we did it kind of like to highlight being in England and, doing our thing. But ordinarily, food is about the same. Saving money is always going to be a concern for me because I'm frugal and I just don't like spending more than I have to. And if you're the same mindset and you want to kind of save some money, one of the best ways to do so is to go to the grocery store. The only challenge is going to the grocery store is going to take you some time. It's going to take time to go there, buy stuff, bring it back to your house, then make the meals yourself. Mostly we're talking about sandwiches. But one thing to keep in mind is that you're not going to find things that look the same as they would, say, in the United States. So you're going to find lots of brands that are new to you, so you have to work through that. And then sometimes you'll find brands that you think you know, like, say, Pepsi, and you'll try it and it tastes completely different. So that's something to keep in mind too as well, in that you're not looking at necessarily apples and apples. Some things that you may think you know what you're buying and you know what you're getting, you're not going to necessarily get that. Also, it's a good adventure. It's a great way to find new products. You can find things that are your absolute favorite. You can be one of those guys that say, oh yeah, if you're going to Europe, make sure you bring me back this because you tried it and it's so nice. So that's an adventure all by itself. And it's also a way to save money. So I strongly recommend you do it, especially with your family, because they can pick what they like. The thing you have to watch out for is to not buy more than you think you'll need, because you're going to have to make a decision. Am I going to end up throwing this away because we can't carry it to our next destination, or buying something that you just don't like and you don't end up eating it and it ends up going to waste. One thing that really did stick out was how clean England was. It wasn't spotless by any means, but it wasn't trashy or run down. Now, granted, we were in the tourist section of England for the most part, but even our neighborhood and every area that we went in England looked really clean. Now, don't get me wrong, there was poverty. We saw homelessness and we saw people in dire straits, but it wasn't a regular, reoccurring thing. And it was refreshing to go to a vacation location, a vacation destination, well known worldwide, and have a really phenomenal experience when it comes to the quality of life that you would see all around you. When it comes to safety and security, there wasn't any time during our entire visit where I felt like things are going to go sideways. Not even a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to exercise universal safety precautions wherever you are, because crime happens everywhere. And to think that Europe is somehow crime-free is some kind of delusional frame of mind. So you have to exercise precaution. Keep your valuables close and in a safe location. But, I really didn't see anything that caused me to be concerned. And there wasn't a heavy security footprint either. There were protesters, but it was, in my opinion, an orderly protest. But safety was not a major concern. But it doesn't mean that crime is not apparent. I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that England is some panacea, because it's not. Here's another pro tip for you. If you're going to multiple countries in Europe, I recommend you go to the easy country first. That's one of the reasons why we went to London. We wanted something where we could get jet lag out of the way, figure our way out, make sure that we don't have any phone problems and everything was working well, because we knew that we were going to go to countries that people spoke different languages, and interpretation and understanding road signs are going to be a major problem. So we went to the easy country first to kind of get all of that stuff out of the way, and then everything after that would be a little bit more challenging, but we could kind of ease our way into it as opposed to jumping right into the fire. So that's a big recommendation to you, especially if you're going with other people, and especially if you're going with young kids. Earlier in the broadcast, I said we had flexibility, not just because we were with people who had a lot of different interests, but we also had to be mindful of the weather. For the most part, it was sunny and warm. However, rain could dampen, pardon the pun, a lot of our outdoor plans. So we definitely kept an eye on the weather, and we looked to make sure that it wasn't going to rain, and if it was going to rain, what can we do inside the rain if it's raining? We could go to museums, do indoor activities. So we had a host of indoor activities that we had set aside just in case it rained. No matter how you slice it or how you try to save, this trip was going to end up being expensive. We knew that going in. And one of the biggest expense was going to be coming from our kids, wanting to buy this, wanting to do that, always asking for stuff. The way we looked at it is we were going to cover your food, your entertainment, your lodging, and your transportation. However, they wanted to buy a whole bunch of trinkets and wanted extra meals and all these different kind of things. And one of the things that we did to cut down on this whole entire constant begging debacle was we gave them their own money. At the start of the trip, everybody got $200 American to spend however they want. If you want to go and get a shirt or buy a trinket or keep the money and go home with it, you can do whatever you want. And some of my kids are really frugal and some are not. Some spent all $200 and wish they had more, while others brought home almost all the money. So what it did was it kept them from bothering, but constantly asking on our end. And when they would ask, all we would say is, you have your own money. And they would ask me, say, well, you have your own money. Now, one of the things I definitely wish that I had helped them worked out a little bit more is how much money to change out. When you change money, there's a change cost fee, and we had gotten money beforehand. Even before we came to England, we had changed over into some pounds. But one of the things that our kids didn't have access to was a credit card. So they were all under 18 years old. So they were pretty much using our credit cards to buy stuff, and we would just take money from them that way. So you can give them their own money, they spend it, you deduct the money from them by them giving you the American cash, and then you just basically use your credit card. That way you don't have to deal with transaction fees and changing over and having local currency. When it came to the use of credit card, pretty much everywhere we went took credit cards, with the exception of street vendors. They would take credit cards, but we just didn't feel comfortable giving them our credit cards. So we would give them cash. And that's when having a small amount of cash would come in handy. But outside of that, you really don't need to have cash. A credit card is going to be fine. I would recommend you call your credit card company and let them know you're traveling abroad. So when they see all these charges for stuff, they're not going to cancel your card, because canceling all your credit cards while you're abroad and trying to make these long distance calls, not only is it a waste of time, it's also just very inconvenient and very frustrating. It can be embarrassing. Before I left for this trip, I knew that one of the things I struggled with was trying to figure out how much money to take, and trying to figure out how much do I need to exchange for local currency. One of the challenges was they charged me $10 just to do the transaction. And also I felt I wasn't getting a good rate of return. So I knew that I was losing when I changed money over. When you do your credit card, a lot of credit cards don't charge a transaction fee. So I was really wanting to rely on credit card, but I knew that my family would find things that street vendors were selling that they wanted to buy. So what I did was I estimated for each country, each person would spend about $30. So that right there, I did the calculation in cash, and that's how I figured out how much to bring in cash. Now, what also you definitely need local currency for is to use the bathroom. And this is one of the things that I completely hated about the trip was when you went to use the bathroom, oftentimes they would charge you a fee, usually about $1 to use it, but it would be in a coin base, so you couldn't use your credit cards most times to go in there, so you have to have cash with you for street vendors and also for the bathroom. Here's a recommendation for you. Make sure that when you leave that country, you spend up all the cash. So keep track of the money you're spending, because when you leave, whatever cash you're left with, you're stuck with it. By the time you do an exchange and pay the transaction fee, you're going to be just losing money. So definitely keep track of how much cash you're spending. And towards the end of the trip, you want to get rid of all that cash and spend it up. You don't want to go home with it. It's not a good souvenir. Here's my final pro tip in regards to London, and something that we did throughout the entire trip that I would recommend you replicate. There were going to be days that we were going to be on our feet for the entire day, and we were going to travel, and we were going to do a lot of walking, putting 25,000 steps on easy. However, we wanted to break it up a little bit. We didn't want to have all those days back to back to back. We were going to push it. Don't get me wrong. We're not going to be sitting on our hands trying to figure things out. We were going to be pretty much on the move the entire time. However, we had broken it up where we had some relaxed days in between, where we could, like one of the days was the store that we had gone to, Harrods. That was a relaxed day for me because I went into that store and I just chilled, looked around, and really wasn't very active. However, my wife and daughter were maybe far more active, but it was still a chill day for them where they maybe did maybe 15,000 steps. And that's something that you got to get accustomed to. It's going to be a lot of walking. The average American walks maybe 3,000 to 4,000 steps per day, but a slow day abroad, you're looking at maybe 10 to 15,000 steps. A busy day, you're looking at 20, 25,000 steps. So getting yourself in shape, having great walking shoes even before you land is going to be extremely important. If you are a parent traveling with a kid and one kid goes down, that could be disastrous for your vacation. That could be a day loss, or at the very least, one parent stays with the sick child while the other parent takes all the other kids somewhere else. And you don't want that to happen. So one of the things I strongly recommend is bring lots of sanitizer. We were sanitizing out the yin yang. Also, another challenge is that bathroom availability in Europe is not nearly what it is in the United States. And sometimes you have to pay to go to the restroom, which seems bizarre, but you do. So whenever you're in a restaurant that has bathroom availability, absolutely take advantage of it, because you're going to be drinking a lot all day long. So you're going to be using the bathroom maybe a lot more often than not, especially when with young kids. And then we're at a location and somebody wants to use the bathroom and there's no readily available bathroom, that could be a major problem. So making sure that nobody gets sick and that we're constantly hydrated and that we're using the bathroom on a regular basis is a challenge within itself. Before going on the trip, one of the things I thought about was, it looks almost silly or sounds silly right now as I look back, but it was how I would dress and how I would appear. For whatever reason, I had it in my head that Europeans dressed a little bit more upscale and sophisticated than Americans do. But, the reality is on the ground, I found out not to really be the case, or I really didn't notice. And the reason why is because I was so busy trying to figure out where I was going and how to get there that I didn't pay any attention to that. When it comes to how you look outside, there are two things that you're going to come to mind. Number one is going to be comfort, and then number two is going to be looks. So sometimes you can find things that looks great but are not comfortable, or things that are comfortable but don't necessarily look that great. In my opinion, maybe it's because I'm older, but I always go towards comfort. You're going to be walking a whole lot. Make sure you have the necessities. If it's supposed to be cold outside, make sure you have enough clothes to put on. And if it's going to be warm, make sure you dress appropriately. So check the weather forecast before you leave the house and before you leave your home port to get to Europe to find out what the weather's like, and make sure you have appropriate clothing. But I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy any new outfits. Okay, now that's from my perspective. My wife will probably disagree with that, but I would definitely, we both agree that comfort trumps everything else. Make sure that you're comfortable, because if you're not, no matter what you're seeing or what you're doing, you're going to be miserable. Prior to going, I did some research and I heard a lot about how people drove on the roadways and that you have to watch out for cars and they drive a lot faster and all these different types of things. In my experience, it was pretty much typical of what I would expect in any American city as far as driving behavior. The one thing I'd caution you, especially when you're traveling with kids, is that they drive on the other side of the road. So what I mean by that is, they driving on the left, we drive on the right. So sometimes instinctively, you may look in the wrong direction before stepping into the roadway. And it may take a little getting used to. It's a little disorienting that they drive on the opposite side of the roadway. But that's something to watch out for, to make sure that you don't put yourself in a dangerous position. When we were traveling, we were going to be seeing a lot of historical sites, things that you don't come across every day. And in order for kids to have an appreciation for the experience, they have to have some understanding of what exactly are they looking at and why is it important. And one of the things I wish I had done more is prepare my kids for what they were going to see, so that when we are looking at it, they won't be as distracted and realize the importance of it all. And when we were in England, that was not necessarily a problem. But when we went to some of the other sites in Europe, there wasn't maybe as much a desire to spend all day doing something, because they knew how much energy it would be, because they weren't really looking at it as something that was worthwhile. So getting them in the right frame of mind is something definitely that you need to lay the groundwork for before you even leave the United States. Here's a good bit of practical advice to you. Vacation is expensive. It's time consuming, and it costs lots of money to go halfway around the world in order to see historical sites. And when you're doing that, you've already invested a great deal in the trip. The last thing you want to do is be in your hotel room flat on your back because you're too exhausted and you have to burn a day because you can't carry on. Or even when you're in the moment, you can't experience it as richly or as fully as you would have liked because you're just too exhausted to do so. I said this earlier, but the average person doesn't walk that much. We're looking at 4,000 steps a day, which is a very low bar. So when you go on vacation and all of a sudden now you're doing 20, 25,000 steps, that's a big mountain to climb. And oftentimes at some point, usually day 4 or 5, your body is going to crash. And who knows how long it will take it to recover. And it doesn't really recover. You just feel like you're in a full-on, tired mode for the entire vacation. My big recommendation to you, lose a couple pounds before you get on vacation. And also a few months out, start to exercise, work out, so you can get your heart rate up. You can get your body in shape to be able to handle the rigors of a European trip, because there's going to be lots of walking. There's no way around it. Even if you can afford to Uber and taxi everywhere, it's still going to be far more hectic than a typical American day. So definitely prepare physically for the trip, because you will not regret it in the end. You'll be far more alert to understand and appreciate what's going on, and you'll have far more energy so you can enjoy. If you're sitting at home watching this video thinking that that's for me, but it's not for you, and you think you can't do this trip, the reality is you can do it. There are several more countries to go. This is the easy one, and it gets more complicated, and I think there's a lot more attractive things to see in the latter part of our trip. But you can do it. Don't think it's too much. I made a lot of mistakes on the way, and I made this video to share them all and embarrass myself and to let you know that you can do it too. And I hope this video is an inspiration to you, and I hope you stay tuned and watch some of the other adventures that are to come in our grand European vacation. So stay tuned, a lot more to come.